Telstra Optics here. We're here at 2025 SHOT Show. We're here with the Dark Lord of Optics, Ilya Koshkin. Thank you for coming by today. And Ilya's going to be doing a little bit of demonstration. We work with Ilya on the reticle designs, and he's going to be talking a little bit about reticle days and the engineering inside the optical equipment.
Right, absolutely, it's my pleasure. Right, so before I get into this long and boring reticle lecture, a very good way to approach this is to take a shooter, and what many of you don't know, Mr. Slav Guns, aside from all the things else, he does shoot guns, allegedly.
Allegedly, except in the wintertime.
Yeah, well, I shoot in the winter, the range is empty, so I own it. So different approach.
I don't think you know what winter is, though.
I grew up in Moscow.
But now you forgot about all that.
I live in the mountains.
Okay.
But regardless, all jokes aside, this is not an idle question. So I know you started shooting a while back. You get a chance to try a lot of different scopes.
Yes.
What are you looking for? What did you find works for you in a reticle, in a precision rifle scope?
So that is a loaded question. And one of the things, first of all, I'm really glad we're having this discussion in person. So we've done a number of live streams over the past couple of years talking about, all the different reticle choices. And anytime there's a new scope, there's hey, what do you think about the reticle? That question almost always comes up. And one of the big things, I think everyone is a shooter, I'm sure you did as well. When we start shooting, over time we're going to transition. And we're going to transition whether we're going to go and find ourselves, hey, we're hunters, or we're competitive shooters, or we're ELR shooters. So for me personally, and I think for a lot of gun owners, when you get your first real rifle that can actually shoot accurately, you're okay, well, what do the professionals use? And I thought that the Tremor 3 reticle was the more stuff on it, that's what I needed to have because, well, that's what the pros have, and the more information you have, the better off it is. But over the years, and I would say especially over the last 3 to 4 years, and over the last 12 months, particularly as I started shooting precision rimfire, what I want in the reticle is completely different from what I thought I wanted. And now, I think I'm almost as picky with reticles as you are.
So there is a good reason for it. Whenever you look through a rifle scope, whenever you go to shoot, the one thing you always see is the reticle. You don't see how pretty the scope is, you don't see how wonderful the anodizing is, but you look through it and you have an aiming point.
Yeah.
And that aiming point has to be good enough. Now, there is a lot of personal preference, right? And I've heard people say all the time, oh, it's super individual, and I say that too. But the way our eyes and our brains, how our vision system works, it is the same in all of us. And there are general principles that apply to all of us. Now, there are minor variations, but fundamentally, we all see and we all aim the same way. Max brought up, Slav Guns, excuse me.
It's okay.
Brought up the Tremor 3 reticle. US military does use it for no real good reason. Does the reticle work? Yes, kinda, until you get tired.
Yeah.
And then all hell breaks loose. And all the guys I know who are really good, who use Tremor 3, different Tremor reticles, they don't use all the crap, they just use it like a normal mill grade reticle. Yeah. That's it.
And I think, so the point that you brought up, it's almost it's nice to have all the features, but at the end of the day, when we're tired, we default to it. And one of the things that I found, when you start shooting matches, by the time I get to stage 6 or 7 of the day, I'm I just want to make sure that I can see clearly, that the reticle is going to be in focus, and by that point, it's even for example, if I'm usually a dialer, I might just end up holding over, or if I'm a holdover, and I can't think straight, hey, am I actually holding over in the right subtension? I'm okay, I can't see straight, I'm tired, let me just dial in and try to get on with it. And oftentimes, I've played with some scopes, I'm just getting lost in this. And I just want to make sure it's nice and easy, so make sure the scope functions well, and I have a good eye box, I have a good field of view, and I'm not hunting too much.
Correct. So, and you're a shooter, you're not a hunter. I am also a hunter. If you just hiked 5 miles and you're on that elk in fading light, I'm sweaty, I'm shaky, adrenaline is pumping through. I'm trying to figure out, is it the 3rd hash mark or the 4th hash mark? Not always a good way to go.
Yeah.
So from here, let's talk a little bit, before I talk about Telson's reticles, I know it's a long introduction, let's talk a little bit about what the general principles are. Every reticle has a primary aiming point.
Okay.
And one of the cornerstones of reticle design, this is something that many very busy reticles do not do, is that when you're tired, when you're in a rush, your eye has to default to a primary aiming point. They absolutely must. If you glance through the scope and you're not sure what to aim with, quickly, something is wrong. That's one. Two, you want to have reasonable visibility across the magnification range. Okay. For precision, we use front focal plane scopes. On low power, the reticle gets fairly thin. You have to have the means to see the primary aiming point again, clearly and accurately. It may not be super bold, but it does have to stand out, even if you have to use illumination for it. The third thing is that the way our eyes and our visual system evolved over the years, we like horizontal symmetry. So if you are outdoors, and I'm trying to find people here who actually go outdoors, because you all are pale, you look like very indoor people, including you.
Well, very restricted from going outdoors for a number of months.
Yeah, it's winter in Canada, that's right, yeah.
Okay, I would say our Texan fellows, those
if
guys
you
go out.
and you look at the horizon, what do you see? You see a horizon line, you see sky above it, and all sorts of stuff you want to see below it. So we are very used to vertical asymmetry. If you go from up, down, everything looks different. But horizontally, what we line up to needs to be relatively symmetric. So if you have a reticle that has a crosshair and a little bit here, and a huge blob all the way on the side, guess what's going to happen? You go fast. You're not going to be centered. You're going to be doing this. Okay? Right. So the symmetry, the visibility, the primary aiming point. If you're talking about competition, about long-range competition, NRL, Hunter, PRS, things like that, another thing you want to have a good feature set, but you do not want it to be so pervasive that you cannot spot your own shots. Because you have to control recoil, you have to see impact, because if you tell me you've never missed, I'm going to call you a liar right here.
So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think one of the biggest evolutions I have as a shooter, at first when I started getting into it, I'm like, okay, I need at least 20 mils of holdovers because I loved holding over.
I know, we've had that discussion.
And I don't mind if it's a top, but right now, one of the biggest things I look for is I need the top half, or I need a good amount of paint in the scope that's gonna be visible, so I can spot my own shots. Or if you're going out to the range and you're shooting with somebody else and you're spotting for another competitor, you need to be able to easily see it. So I know with some of the reticles, I know I went to a couple of media events, we shot some really high-end scopes, but I had to bend the scope up and over, and I'm only really using a quarter of the field of view that's available. Whereas now I have a strong preference for, hey, give me the holdovers. It almost isn't as critical as long as I have at least 10 or more, I'm good. I don't need 20 or 30, because once you crack the magnification up, you're not gonna see it anyway.
Correct.
But the top, I need to have a visible plane where we can quickly see what's going around.
Exactly.
And it almost it makes it easier for your eye to spot where the target is.
Okay. That is a very, very good observation. Here's what happens, right? If you go on a competition and you line up on a plate, you dope usually know relatively well, right? We have ballistics. And you're making a wind call. If you miss the first shot, how far off are you usually?
Depends on caliber, but it's usually going to be not that much. The problem is though, at various distances, it's almost very tough to see, because you don't know on what side of the plate that you're on.
Exactly. You don't know if it's going to be top, right, bottom, left.
Yeah.
So what you want is reasonable visibility around whatever your aiming point is, right, while still maintaining the ability to hold. Because after you miss, and you will miss, if you're on the clock, you're not going to be dialing again. You're going to be making that correction with the radar.
Yep.
Okay. Make sense?
Yes, it does. Okay, so here's the point. You mentioned the center point here, and I know sometimes you have the discussion, and oftentimes I think I have a preference, but it's almost maybe a secondary or third point. So we see scopes all the time. Okay, some of them will have a small dot. Mm-hmm. Some of them will have an empty space in between. Some of them will have a straight crosshair. What's the deal with that?
That's the preference.
Okay.
That relatively minor thing is a personal preference. I have a way of working around it, and we'll look at that when we get to the FAR2 reticles. But what you want the exact aiming point to be depends on how you were trained.
Okay.
And I'll get a little bit into that when we bring Molly up. She's a competition shooter. I'm very, very curious about how she thinks about it.
All right.
Okay. Anyhow, thank you for that introduction. Let's get Molly mic'd up. This is a mill reticle. It's in a second focal plane scope. Okay. What do we know with great certainty about second focal plane scopes? I assume you're not using them in competition, right?
I'm using the 5 to 25 in competition and the 5 to 32.
That's a front focal plane, right?
Yep. So I'm not.
You're
using
not using this. The biggest reason you do rimfire competition and center fire.
Rimfire and center fire.
Excellent,
Yes, sir.
right? So she's a shooter. I'm a professional bullshooter. You can see the difference. But let's go back to the HR2 for a moment. Okay. The reason she doesn't use this for competition is that the dimensions of the reticle are only accurate on one calibrated magnification. In this case, it's on 15 power. The scope is a 2.5 to 15 by 44. It's a very nice crossover scope. You can use it for a lot of hunting. But the idea is that with a scope like that, if you have to extend the range, you are going to dial everything, right? And if you're going to use any reticle corrections, you're not going to be using them in terms of reticle gradations very much. You're going to be shooting at the target, you're going to miss, and I'm half a target away. You're not thinking in angles, you're going to be thinking in terms of what the target is. Okay. When you switch to front focal plane, let's do FAR2. There you go. So that's the long range precision reticle. Everything changes. Now the reticle allows you to do a lot more. So I have a question for you. In terms of, this is what we just discussed with Max. In terms of the primary aiming point, do you prefer dot, crosshair, a empty spot? Do you care?
So I prefer a dot in the middle, just because for me, for my rimfire competitions especially, when we're shooting at 1/4 inch targets, I really like to be able to see, okay, if I need left edge, I want to see that dot right on the left edge. So it's a lot easier for me to find my target, and I can see my impact once it goes.
So for center fire, same difference?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Very cool. So that will tell you the age difference. I am about the age of her grandfather, ballpark. So when I learned to shoot, a very long time ago, we didn't have fancy dot reticles. So I learned to take a crosshair and dissect the target and use that to level out the scope. We didn't have any gadgets, and cut right through the center of the reticle. And then as I started shooting more and I started shooting further, I started transitioning to using a tiny little center dot for aiming. Does it make a practical difference? No, it depends on how you train. Or it depends on the game you play. The game she's playing, the options are limited, so the rules are going to drive you toward a very specific aiming point.
Yes.
Have you been using this reticle in competition?
Yep.
So what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, I love it. It's not too busy, so the Christmas tree isn't too busy to where I can still see where my splash impacts. I can see the trace of my bullet. Even in 22 and center fire, I like to see where I impact. So if I do miss, I can make my correction so my next shot is on target.
Okay.
So I love the reticle, especially in my 5 to 25 and the 5 to 32. It's the same FAR2 reticle, so I'm not trying to learn a different reticle each time. So
that is
really
actually
nice for that.
a really, really good point. So what Telson did is that they've got a expensive scope, and they've got a less expensive scope, and they have the same reticle. So what you see in front of you is always the same.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to take credit for the reticle design. Honestly, it was a collaborative effort, primarily because I am genetically lazy. So I made Jared from Telson Optics do all the hard work. And I would just go, change this, change that. That's more or less how that worked. But what we were going for is exactly what Molly is talking about. We wanted to give her this fine aiming point, and the challenge to solve was how do you provide immediate means to do shot corrections without making the center of the reticle excessively busy. That's where this structure comes in, where we do the center dot, point 2 milliradian away. There are small hash marks all around it. And the way this works on high magnification, you have a fine dot. The hash marks don't take too much space, so you have relatively open center. So if you miss slightly, and remember, when she misses it by this much, when I miss it, you have a little bit of open space around it, and you have reference marks where you can make a quick and immediate shot correction. When you go on low power, this becomes a small crosshair, and for the dinosaurs like me who used to shoot, it's a nice way of saying this, well, let's say man-sized targets at 800 meters, we did it with a crosshair. Okay, that's pretty much that. The tree is another interesting point. We see a lot of different reticles out there with the tree portion that is incredibly pervasive. Again, there are very specific rules here. If you have a, let's say this is a 5-32 scope, below 10 power, I don't really want to see the tree. Below 8, it should just completely fade away from your sight. And starting from about 12, you should be able to use it. Okay? Do you know why it is that particular breakdown in magnification? Why it should be really usable from about 12 and up?
I believe so then you can just really be able to zoom out and then see what your surroundings are. Correct. So then you can tone in to what target you're going for.
That is absolutely correct. The tree portion of the reticle is most useful when you are on a moderate magnification. And the 12 power did not come by accident. When you look at a scope on 12 power, this is more or less the minimum magnification where you can clearly see a 0.2 milliradian spacing and choose which side of it you're aiming with.
Yes.
Below that, they start blurring in, and especially when you're in a rush, you will miss your hold. Okay. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. In order to avoid that, what we did with the tree, every full milliradian, there is a larger dot. So if you have to use the tree between 8 and 10, you will not be going with the 0.2s. You have a full milliradian mark, and you will see that. But the tiny little dots in the center will be essentially fading away from view. All make sense?
Yep, all makes sense.
If you look at the windage marks, I don't know how much wind you have to hold. So during the industry day, I was shooting at the 18-inch plate at 1,000 yards with a 308 and that wind. And I finally hit the stupid thing. I had 3.4 milliradian of wind. So that's what these things are here for. And if you think they look funny, like bumps on a railroad, that is intentional. When you're in a rush, when you're timed, when you're tired, it is very difficult to pick out hash marks if they all look the same.
Yes.
Okay. And we have 0.2 spaced hash marks on the bottom of the horizontal and 0.5 milliradian hash marks just above. And on top of it, where this thing sticks out the most, that's your quick 0.5 hold. The idea here was that to give you enough information, but to keep it away from the center so that you're not crowded. That's why toward the center, you see they're converging in. Okay. You with me?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
All
It's
right.
not busy, so you're not trying to get confused.
The same business with the numbers. Notice the numbers that are closer to the center are smaller than the ones on the periphery. Because on low power, this is when you're going to see this. They're going to look small, right? And you know what 2 is. Even if the number looks a little small, you know this is 2, you know this is 4. Now you start counting further there. You don't want to be counting hash marks. You want to see the number. That's why the numbers out on the periphery, horizontally and vertically, are looking larger. Okay. So, quiz for you, for those who haven't heard this lecture yet. Why is the tree 14 milliradian? Not 15, not 20, not 8, not 10. Why 14? I love putting people on the spot. If I make her blush, it made my day.
For consistency.
Yeah.
Consistently making people blush, yeah, I do that. So why 14? The answer is relatively simple. We have a ton of different calibers. Mm-hmm. You probably don't shoot 308 very much anymore.
Nope.
But with a 16-inch barrel 308 at sea level, to get on a 1,000-yard plate is approximately 11.7 milliradian, right around 12. Okay. So, and it so happens that where you're going to be using the tree the most is not so much with the precision bolt guns, but far more with accurate semi-autos, large frame, 308s and 6.5s. The tree is sized the way it is, so that if you happen to have a 16-inch barrel AR-10 that's accurate enough for this, you can easily get to 1,000 and have a little bit of margin for error.
That makes sense.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Right. If you take a few other cartridges and run through the ballistics a little bit more carefully, what you will find is that 14 milliradian, with a vast majority of them, gets you just past the transonic region. And if you think you're going to hold with the reticle beyond the transonic region and hit something not by accident, I've got the bridge to sell you. All right? Make sense? Okay. So that's the FAR 2 reticle. Notice the illumination is only on the horizontal lines. If you illuminate the whole tree in low light, it completely destroys your eye's ability to adapt and obscures your target. And do you have a picture of this zoomed out a little bit? What you want to do is you want this to look like a T-shape or crosshair shape on low power. That's why the illumination is where it is. On low power, you illuminate the primary lines, you don't see the tree, and you have a nice, fast, and robust aiming point. Okay. So this is the reticle for relatively high magnification scopes. And the way you use them, on low power, it's a simple crosshair. On medium power, you get a choice. You can dial, you can use a tree. And on high power, the hell is that? And on high power, you're gonna dial. If you're shooting at 30 power, dial. That's pretty much. Mr. Trent Elson is here. I made Molly blush. Let's see if I can do this.
The PH2 reticle, I feel, is one of the most versatile reticles, as I can take it and do everything from long-range hunting to NRL 22 to NRL hunter matches. You know, at 3 power, you have the floating crosshairs right there at the illumination, but then if you're walking through the brush, you know, you need to pull up the gun quickly and something's right there. But then for my long-range hunting applications, I can still use the same scope, same setup on the laydown, you know, use the reticle to take my shots out 700-800 plus yards, you know. An NRL hunter, super easy to use. You can quickly do your wind holdovers on. It's one of my favorite reticles, and I'm glad to be shooting it.
That's very cool. So all good observations. Couple of things. We just talked about the FAR 2 reticle that is used in the high magnification scopes. This one will look eerily similar. It is not the same reticle, but one of the things we were going for, no matter which Telson scope, Telson front focal plane scope you're using, when you look through it, there will be clear family resemblance. The primary aiming point is structured the same way. The hash marks for the wind are structured similarly. The illumination is sparse so that on low power it's not overpowering. The basic structure of the tree is similar, but the tree is not as big. This is a 10 milliradian tree because for where this scope is going to be used, it's a 3 to 18 by 50, more of a medium range magnification. You do not need as much of the tree. Could you use it in theory? Yes, but the compromise is not worth it because you do not want this thing to be too busy. This is the quintessential scope for an accurate carbine, accurate 6.5 Grandel, 556 for relatively lightweight hunting rifle. But you know, I live out west. The closest shot I've ever taken on game was more than 300 yards. And I talked to the guys from back east. They go, 300 yards, that's another state, right?
Yeah.
Not for us. You're out in Arizona, right?
Kansas, western Kansas.
Yeah, it's even more awful. Right. He shoots on these Great Plains. I'm shooting from one mountain to another, right? And we do this with moderate magnification scopes all the time. So we want to dial when we can. We want to use the tree in a pinch. But if you look through any of the front focal plane Telson scopes, the basic sight picture is going to be extremely similar. What are the differences? We brought in the thick bars a little bit closer. Why? Because you're going down to 3 power, you need them closer for the reticle to be visible. And if you have more than 6 milliradian of wind, I'm sorry, get closer. Like this is not what you want to be doing on a live animal, right? the illuminated portion is abbreviated for the same reasons. We want to give you on low power a cleaner, nicer, simpler side picture. But if you zoom in, you still have the tree, you still have the relatively open center, you still have these 4 dots that are half miliradian apart that are to give you a reference point for quick shot correction. So tell me, have you ever missed the first shot?
Oh yes.
Exactly.
Yes, it happens.
I tried to get it to lie, it didn't work.
No matter how good of hunter you are, you have missed the first shot
Hunter,
before.
competitor, anything.
Yes.
So, but if you're not, if you've been doing this for a little while, your first missed shot is not going to be 28 milliradian away. It's going to be somewhere right here. And you need reference points to make a quick shot correction and land the second shot. And you have to do so quickly. You're not going to be able to dial again. You have to move fast. But otherwise, the same basic reticle design language carries over from FAR 2 reticle to the PH2 reticle. Did I get the name right?
Yes.
See how it's done?
Yeah. Performance hunter.
The performance bullshitter. You are the performance hunter. The one other thing I want to mention that we did not really cover is why are these little dots inside of the thick bars? And this is where you'll want to put in the zoomed out reticle if you can.
I'll put it on the screen.
This is fine, yeah. Okay, I have it on this one and we'll put it up on the screen. One of the arguments people make for a very, very extensive reticle tree is that, oh, I may have to hold when I shoot my 22, 8 count is over, yada, 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 yada. It is honestly, it is a real case, right? I have made shots. I like to shoot subsonics far away. I have made shots where I maxed out my scope elevation, I've dialed 20 milliradian, and added another 10 from the reticle, and was still holding over. I've done it 5 times in 20 years of shooting. I shoot more rounds in an average month than a typical hunter does in his entire life. And in the 20 years of doing this, I've done it 5 times. So I do not want to crowd it. I do not want to make a long tree. I do not want to add anything that's going to be distracting to satisfy that one extremely rare occasion. So what we thought of, and I don't remember if it was Jared's idea or mine, I'll take credit. So both on the horizontal and on the vertical lines, because they're relatively thick, we gave you every 2 milliradian, we gave you this little opening. And if you have to take that relatively obscure shot, where you'll be doing some guesswork anyway, if you've ever shot at 22 to 800 yards, you know what guesswork is. You're also masochistic, but that's a different ballgame. This will give you some reference points of where you have to hold, and you will not hit it in the first shot. But what that will do, that will give you enough information to take a first shot, hopefully see the impact, and walk it in. In military terms, here instead of precision fire, we're really talking about cone of fire. There is certain dispersion specific to the rifle. You can imagine a cone of fire, and you are using these reference dots to just walk your shots in. And that's pretty much it. So as a general overview, I started with the general principles, and I think I want to repeat that again. The primary aiming point has to be intuitive. The tree has to be sufficient but not excessive. Less is more. The wind holes have to be distinctive enough to do so, to use them quickly. And the illumination has to be done in a way that aids you on low power and does not overwhelm you in all other conditions. And it's a wrap. Bullshitting is an art form.